So welcome to our third class for the Homegrown Block of the Month from Wagon Quilt Company. We're in Springville, Utah, and I'm glad you're all here for our class, our tutorial today. I'm going to first talk a little bit about circles and how to do circles with Spargo projects. I've had a few people ask about doing circles, and she mentions in the book to punch out the circles in a certain size and then use those. So I'll show you how she punches them out. There is a tool that she has available on her website, but I find it incredibly difficult to use. So I'll show you some other ideas that might work for circles too. You have to have a big rubber mallet to do it. And then this little acrylic block like this. And then I think originally these were probably leather punches. And this is what she does sell, a set of these on her website, but they're pretty pricey. So what you're going to do if you had these is you put it on this little mallet here. And the bigger ones are the hardest ones to cut out. And when I first tried it, I tried to get my husband to help me, and he could do them, but I have a harder time because he's a little stronger than I, and he works as a contractor. So, but anyway, don't jump too far. So that didn't quite go through. The smaller ones are easier. And if you get it really good, sometimes you can go all the way through, sometimes not. So this little one's a lot easier to get it to punch. But you can see that it's pretty cumbersome. This is an option for you. But I just find it really, really difficult. There are other options. If you follow Wendy Williams or have done anything from her, you know how she does circles, right? No. She just does them freehand. So she cuts a square, and then she just cuts a circle. And if you do them a lot, you get pretty good at making them quite round. One thing you have to realize too is that Spargo's things are pretty wonky sometimes. If your circle isn't perfect, I don't know that it matters all that matters.
There's something around it anyway.
That's right. You're going to put a stitch around it. Mm-hmm. So you can follow Wendy Williams. She has a little plastic bag or a little bag, and if she has any little pieces left over from what she cuts out circles, and then she puts them in her little bag. So she doesn't waste any little pieces this big. They all go into circles, and you'll notice that almost all of her things have hundreds of little circles in them. This is one that I'm doing from so you can see how she just cuts them out randomly and then stacks them and does all kinds of fun things with them. So that's one way you can do them. Another way I've done is by using these Avery stickers. And I've just bought them on Amazon so I can get the sizes that I want. I've done several penny rugs, and so I got them in sizes that I could layer them in 3 layers like this. And what you do with these is you just take one and stick it on to your fabric and then cut it out. And what you'll find is you can use one of these stickers maybe 10 or 12 times if you're really careful, and just stick it on the next piece. And then they get so they're not sticky enough, but I have a whole roll of them. So that's one way you can do circles, and it works out quite nicely.
But some of them, I can't find the Avery stickers just really, really small.
Right. So the biggest problem is your little tiny ones, like your 1/4 inches. And they're impossible to cut out. So
you can't really use a hole punch like they say.
what I've used is these Fisker brand ones, and I have ordered a few into the shop. They don't cut it completely around, they leave a little tiny tag, but they do a pretty good job. So this is what I use for my little 1/4 inch circles. If you get it in there and punch it, it leaves a little tiny tag on it, but usually it just pulls right out, or you can just cut it. And that will give you your little tiny 1/4 inch ones.
Yeah, they would.
Just the regular ones usually don't, but you have to get these kind of higher end punch or paper punches, and they usually work fairly well. This Fisker's one, there are a few over there too, if you want to go in with your friends or something and use them. But there are several places where they like put them across the top of the roof, or
Yeah.
they use them in certain ways. Another possible way to cut circles is if you have like a Sizzix or a machine that cuts.
Here's, what's
You-
yours called?
It actually cuts, there's different brands of course, but they actually cut your wool quite nicely, the newer ones, not the old ones. So that's an option if you have those. This kind of archaic thing is also works.
Stencil?
Just a stencil. So I'm going to be showing you how to do the whipped woven circle, and I've got this little wise man from the Nativity, and I'm going to put little whipped woven circles across his robe right here. And what I've done with that, I've got 2 of them. Put that back there. I just use a friction pen, and a friction pen goes away with heat once you put the iron on it. So I've just picked the 1/2 inch circle on here, and I've drawn it on the wool like this. So you could also do this with cutting them out. You could draw the little circle on there, and that would also be something that might work for you. So those are just some options. With the bigger pieces, I just use the soft fuse or the freezer paper and cut around them. And they actually turn out quite nicely if they're not too small. The smaller ones are the hardest ones. That's some ideas on circles. There is a little piece of ribbon in this next group of houses, and it will be the roof line. It's a different color on her sample, but it looks really cute with this little orange and
This one?
yes. So you can look at that. And when I put ribbon on, I usually just whip down the edges. You could also do it with your sewing machine and just go down each edge. I do like to turn the ends of it inside so the little pieces don't ravel out. And if you have any other questions about those blocks, then feel free to ask me about them. I think they're really similar to the other ones that you have done in the past.
Are these gonna be easy to do? With these?
And I can show you one thing that Sue Spargo has is a little, and I'll find it. It's actually a bookmark with the bees on it, or she has pictures of them in her book of different bees that she has made. Maybe I left it at home. But the bees are all done with bullions, and so if you're getting good at bullions, I think you'll be able to do your little bees. It's fun also when they all don't look exactly alike, because then, you know, it's like nature. They're not exactly the same. On this little guy, I'm going to do some whipped woven circles, and I'm going to pass around this little sample that I did earlier this morning of a whipped woven circle. It's really dimensional because it forms little ridges, and it's quite dramatic. So it's this little orange one right here, and if you can pass this back, because I might do some of these samples on this piece. There might be a pin in there too, so be careful. It might be easier if you sort of gather around up here so I can still film this if you don't mind.
Did we do this in something else? One of those
You may have. I think she did a bird's eye, and she also has did some a doorknob with the whipped woven circle. So if you want to come on up, and I'll try to do both ways, you and the video. You can see that I've drawn a little circle right here for the circle. A lot of times, when you're doing a Sue Spargo project, she actually has you stitch on the circle, and then you're doing it on top of that, which is an easy way to get your circular shape. But once you do this on top of it, you're not really going to see the color underneath. So that's how I'm going to draw them on here. So the first thing I'm going to do with this circle that I have drawn here is do some spokes. Sue Spargo also has a little set of spoke ease, she calls, and it has the little spokes. Maybe there's one with 8, and there's one with 6, and there's one with 5 spokes. I'm not sure the number. It is a little difficult to get into the little grooves. You have to have a certain type of pencil. Did you figure out which one it was, Lynn?
It's the sew line.
The sew line.
But Annette bought some. You have a pen also.
Yeah, and I got it up in Salt Lake when
I don't really use them because I just do it by sight, and I'm not too concerned if they're not perfect. So that's just me. You can do it however you want. You can do an even number of spokes, or you can do an odd number of spokes. Sue Spargo says she likes the even number because it makes it more round, but I don't think it really matters. I'm going to actually start in the middle, and I'm going to do the spokes at 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock. And this might be bigger or smaller depending on the size of your circle. And then I'm going to put one in between each of those, going out to the edge of my circle and then back in. Sorry, I'm gonna have to thread again. I do find sometimes that the friction pen wears off as I'm working with it because I have hot little hands.
Huh.
But once you cut your spokes, you don't need it quite so much, do you?
No.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to get another thread because you have to have a thread long enough to do the whole thing. You can't, it doesn't work to stop and start with this stitch. So I've got one right here. I'm gonna make it pretty long, even though this is kind of a small circle.
What needle are you using?
You know, if you have a choice, it would be best to use a tapestry needle because it wouldn't be pointy on the end, but I don't have one here. So you'll notice that I'm using the back of my needle instead of the pointy side of my needle when I start weaving. So let's start in the middle, just on this, in between two of those little spokes, as close to the middle as I can get. And then what I'm going to do is go back and under one of those spokes. I'm not going to go into the wool. I'm just weaving through the spokes. And so I'm going to go back and under and forward 2 spokes. So I'm going to go back under 1 and forward 2. And I'm just going to keep going around and around the same way. So back 1 and forward 2. I also don't especially like using a very thin thread because you could see that it would take forever to weave it. So using maybe a size 12 would take you a long time. This one is actually a 5, so it's going to make it a little bit chunkier.
Okay, so let me see, you're going back 1. Nope,
And
you're fine.
forward 2,
Back 1.
So when you say forward 2, you're going on the top of one and
I'm
under the
going
next
under,
one?
I'm going back, my
Yeah.
thread's here, and I'm going back 1 stitch,
And then
So
over
where's
the
your
next
thread
one.
showing?
No, she's going under 2.
and then I'm going under 2 forward.
Okay.
Oh, so the back one is the one that's
That
getting
shows.
looped.
Correct.
over. Okay.
And it forms little ridges, and as you get bigger it sort of looks like a spider web. If you can look, where's the red one that I did? You can see it a little bit better, pass that around, and you can kind of see how it's going to
Yeah.
look.
So you really, the back is actually just the stitch you just went
Yes,
over.
yes. And this one is I'm doing this one with a variegated thread.
Which I like that, I like the way it looks.
Yeah.
That
So it
really
kind of looks
cool.
cool. I thought I did the red one because I thought maybe you'd be able to see the stitches just a little bit better.
Mhm.
There are times when you can do this only partially, and so these little spokes still stand out. Like I could stop it right now and I'd see some of those spokes poking out. Sometimes she'll say do a half filled one, but I'm gonna try to fill this one. Once you get around to the very edge, it's a little harder to go under those spokes. But I kind of want to make them sort of the same size if I can. But the variegated threads are awfully fun to use. And you, like I mentioned, you can see that I'm going in with the back of my needle. But it would be nice if I had a tapestry, I could go in the other way and not get poked so many times. Okay, I'm getting to a point where it's hard to go under there, so I'm about done. I've filled it quite snugly. And I'll look at it kind of and see if I've probably done the same number all the way around, so it's circular. That looks about right. And then I'll just sink it to the back. So there are my 3 whipped woven circles.
All the same thread.
All the same thread,
fun.
but they look quite different, don't
Yeah.
they? Because
Yeah.
it's a variegated thread.
Very pretty.
Uh-huh. So that's a really fun one. She's using it in your blocks in really tiny spaces.
Yeah,
We
But-
had to do an eye once.
No,
I didn't do the eye, and I hesitated about the
somebody
button.
was putting
It was.
a button there
you-
instead. I
You,
didn't
you
do
think
I think so.
it sounds impossible, but once you get going, it works.
Yeah, it works nicely. Okay, so that's one stitch. Let's go on to our next one. I'm going to show you the pistol stitch. And the pistol stitch is really quite easy, but it forms a really fun kind of radiating look around things, as you can see in this one with the yellow. So I think she does it on the roof line of one thing. She might do it on a bird, or she might go around a circle like this, or do it on the edge so it kind of looks like a sun with rays. Any of those would work really well. And you might want to use your bullion or your Milner needle, because it's straight. And if you're doing any kind of French knot or anything like that, it's nice to have these nice straight needles. So this is basically just doing a French knot or a colonial knot with a tail on it. So I'm going to bring my thread up, and I have gotten so I only do colonial knots, and I can't, my brain won't make me do French knots, but they basically turn out the same. And so you might notice it looks a little weird when I do it. So I'm gonna just make it like I'm gonna do a French knot, okay? And wrap, she says wrap twice, except I'm just going to make the tail on it long. I'm not gonna sink it back where my thread came up. I'm gonna make a little tail that radiates. And like with the French knot, you're gonna have to hold this thread down as you pull it down, so it doesn't form knots you don't want.
You make it look so easy.
Yes, she does.
Does anyone do colonial knots? Like,
I only do colonial
I
knots.
haven't tried a colonial knot.
I've tried them, and sometimes I can do them, and sometimes I cannot figure them out.
I've gotten so it's in my hand memory, and so
Yeah.
I've tried to figure out how to do a French
I
knot. I
like them
can't do it
because I
anymore.
feel like they're
They're a little
more
bit.
consistently
They are, I
good.
think,
They
just a
are.
little bit. But I think French knots are fine too.
Yeah, unless you screw them up.
You do a backward C and then wrap it around. You can do one or two or whatever.
Let's see.
But this is your pistol stitch. And I think that it's not too hard. I think most of you will be able to figure that one out okay. Okay, let's go to this one, which is the cast on bullion. And we've done the bullion before. This one's done a little differently. When I was a little kid, my mom made lots of dresses and things like that. And she would actually do this stitch on the back of the dress. She'd put the hook, but the eye, she would make one of these. And I know when I made a dress for one of my daughters for a wedding, you know, she had like 30 little buttons down the back, and I did little loops like this for the buttonholes, and
Oh, wow.
it was
That's really pretty.
it was crazy, but I did it, you know. So we start like we would do a bullion stitch, and I want these to be a similar size, each of these little loops on the camel's blanket. So you might do some this big and you might do them smaller than this. This is pretty out there, you know. So I'm gonna come down with my needle, and I am using a Milner needle, and then back up approximately the same place that my thread came up. And then instead of wrapping it like you would a bullion, I'm gonna cast them on. So how many of you knit or? So I'm not as good at this as you will be. But you twist it around your finger and then over
You're not poking your finger.
the
like I do.
needle. What you need to do as you get in a rhythm of doing this is make sure you're doing them all the same way, or it gets twisted and it looks funny. So make sure you're always turning your finger the same way and casting it on. With this one, it's like the bullion. You'll probably want to count how many cast-ons you put if you want them all to
Is
look the
this what you
same.
make the bumblebee wings? like?
No, you just do a regular bullion with those. There are a couple of places where she's done it
We've done it in some of our past houses.
on the top of flowers. She might do it along the bottom edge of a roof line. So it gives a scallop shape. You can see I'm not very good at this.
Do you have the bullion needles over in the shop?
They
I can't
are,
see 'em.
they're not called bouillons, they're called Milner.
Oh, okay.
But bouillon and Milner are the same thing. And Sue, I think she recommends a 3 for most of these things that we're doing. So there should be some over there. If we run out, I can order some more. There could be some more in the drawer beneath, but I would have to look and make sure. I also use a number 3 Milner sometimes.
What's the difference, just the eye?
One of them's bigger than the other.
Yeah, the bullion has a bigger eye.
And Sue Sparrow doesn't make a bouillon. I think that Tulip does.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm doing a lot on this one, I think.
So you use a number 3, okay. I always thought you had one.
I use a 1 quite a bit.
I didn't know how many to put.
Okay. And then I am just like the bouillon, I'm gonna pinch it with my finger, gently pull through. If I go too fast, I always get a knot. And then this is the part that's the most important, is just moving this back, gently tugging on this so that extra part of your thread is pulled out, and kind of moving it a little bit. Sometimes this end kind of tends to pull up, and sometimes I'll even just anchor it by going through that little edge right there so it lays down a little bit flatter.
My roof ones did not lay down very well.
That's pretty.
Yeah.
Very
So
pretty.
it makes this fun little scallop. It's a little more tricky, I think, than doing a bouillon, because with a bouillon you're just wrapping it, and this one you have to cast it on. But if you're good at casting on, I think you can get the hang of it.
How do you know how many times to wrap it?
You don't. You practice it, and then you do the same the next time.
Well, like on her roof, she told you to wrap
She
it
did.
Yeah.
15 times
She
or
did.
something.
Okay, what's the next one? I forgot. Woven Picot. Okay. So our next one is going to be the Woven Picot. And here's some Woven Picots. They're not that great that I did last time. I need to use a different thread so you can see it a little bit better. A lot of times we can use these as beaks on birds. We might use it as a leaf. We could use it as a petal for a flower. And if you look in your book, this is on page 148. It'll show you how to do the stitch. And then on this page, it shows you a whole variety of woven picots done in different sizes. So you could do a long skinny one, or you can do wider ones. So those are different ones, and it's kind of fun to use a variegated thread because a lot of times they'll have kind of a stripy look to them. So let me get a thread. It shows up a little bit more on that green. This is also a stitch that you want to have a long thread because you can't stop in the middle. So what size do you want to do today? Do you want to do a 3-spoke or a 5-spoke?
3.
We had to do a bird's beak and it was 3, wasn't it?
Was it 3? I can't remember.
3. Seems like our bird beak was 3.
So what I'm going to decide is how big I want my picot. So let me see. Let's say I want it that long. I'm just pulling something out of my head. And let's do it about that wide. Oh, you can't see it very well, can you? Those dots. What I'm going to do is take a needle, or you can use a pin. That one's not very straight. Let's get a straighter one. Mine are all bent. How about that? And I'm going to put my needle in at the bottom and the top of the size of the picot. Sorry, there's so many things on this little green piece of wool. Then I'll get out my thread, and I'm going to come up on the width of my picot here. And then I'm going to wrap this around my pin or my needle and back down here to the width. So what I've done there is determine the size and the shape of my picot. Let's see if I can get it on there. Now I'm going to come up right in the middle, right next to that pin. And again around the top of my pin. So you can see I'm going to have a 3-spoke picot right there.
So if you did 5, would you do 2 pins?
No, you would just come up here and here in addition.
Okay.
And now I'm going to weave. And I'm going to weave from the top of the picot down to the bottom of the picot. So I'm going under, over and under. Remember when we had those little looms when we were 10 years old?
Mm-hmm.
And wove washcloths for a grandma. That's what I did. I'm going to use the back of my needle again, or you could use a tapestry needle. So it's just an over and, whoops, didn't watch carefully enough, did I? Okay. If it comes undone, that means you wove it wrong. Well, we'll get it going here. That's the problem with using a pin instead of a needle. And don't pull it too tight because it will distort the shape of your picot. I like to also kind of push them up, like if you're really weaving, so they're nice and tight. If you're doing a huge one, you can see these picots on here, they're humongous. They take a lot of thread. I don't know how you...
What would happen if you did run out in the middle of it?
Well,
You'd start over with a longer thread. I guess.
or you would have to,
Just sink it.
you'd have to sink it and it
Come
wouldn't
back.
be free from the wool. So I'm not going through the wool when I'm weaving this. I'm only going under the threads. So when I finish, I'll show you how it is 3-dimensional. I'm gonna push those up so I can put a few more back in here. I like it to fill the space if I can. That's about as tight as I can do it. So I'll come back over here and sink it
So my question is, how do you sink the top? Because when you take out the pin,
It is supposed to be free.
oh, it's supposed to be free, okay.
So I may have to kind of move these just a little.
So the point is not attached to the
No.
wall, okay.
In fact, in this one right here, when I did this one, they were so long that you could actually kind of twist them or move them so they were even more three-dimensional. If you want this to be tacked down, then I will just come up to the end and tack it down. But it is supposed to be free. That's how you are weaving it. These right here, you can see how they're free. And this one, we actually did a 5-spoke one. So it's woven just a little bit more tightly. It looks just slightly different when you weave it. And she talks about doing 7-spoke ones also. If you get huge, these are mostly 1, 2, 3, these are all 5 or 3.
Yeah.
But you can do a 7.
So this one's all loose, these big ones like that?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Put those in there.
Mm-hmm. It looks like that very picture.
yes. You guys both did this one.
Yes.
Yeah, and I just haven't done that part of it yet.
Yeah. So they're not too hard. They just take a lot of thread. So just make sure you're. And if you ran out of thread on this one, then you'd have to sink it down into the back, and then it wouldn't be free. It wouldn't be loose. Yeah. So you could do that if you had to. You might notice where you started and stopped a little bit, but not too bad. Okay, well those are the 4 stitches that we're doing this time. So if you have questions about other stitches or about other parts of the blocks, I would be happy to help answer your questions or work through some stitches with you too.
She had a ladder stitch on one of